In a quiet suburban town stood a prestigious middle school, known for its high academic standards and well-maintained facilities. The school's reputation was polished, admired by many, and sought after by families looking for the best education for their children. However, beneath the surface, there was an unspoken divide that many chose to ignore, a divide between those who had it all and those who struggled to make ends meet. Ethan was one of the students who lived on the other side of that divide. He was a shy, intelligent boy who came from a humble background. His mother worked long hours in a local diner to provide for him, doing her best to make sure he had the basics, but luxury was never an option. Ethan wore hand-me-down clothes from cousins and neighbors, clothes that were often too big or too small, shoes that didn't quite fit right, and a jacket that had seen better days. Despite the challenges he faced at home, Ethan tried his best at school. He loved reading, he loved learning, and he made every effort to participate in class discussions. But the more he tried to fit in, the more he felt out of place. The other kids, with their brand new clothes and shiny shoes, seemed so different from him. He couldn't help but notice how their laughter always seemed a little too loud when they saw him, how whispers would follow him in the hallways. No matter how hard Ethan worked, no matter how much he tried to be kind and friendly, the divide between him and his classmates grew wider with every passing day. The taunts, the looks, he couldn't escape them. It was a typical Friday morning, and the students gathered in the school gymnasium for the weekly assembly. The air was filled with the usual chatter and rustling of papers as teachers organized the students into neat rows. Ethan sat in the back, trying his best to stay out of sight, to blend in with the crowd. His worn-out shoes, scuffed at the toes and faded from years of use, were the last thing he wanted anyone to notice. But of course, that was the first thing that caught the eye of Principal Thompson. As she stood at the front of the gym, overseeing the assembly with her usual stern expression, her gaze swept across the crowd. When it landed on Ethan, she froze for a moment, her eyes narrowed as she took in his shoes, too big, too worn, and too far from the polished look she expected from her students. "Excuse me, young man," Miss Thompson's voice rang out, clear and commanding. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as she turned her attention to him, the weight of her gaze heavy on his chest. "Are those the shoes you chose to wear today?" Ethan felt the heat rush to his face as every pair of eyes in the room shifted toward him. His stomach twisted, and he could feel the sweat on his palms. Yes, ma'am," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The principal didn't wait for an explanation. "Those shoes are completely unacceptable," she declared, her tone loud enough for everyone to hear. "This school has standards, and we expect every student to represent it in a professional manner. This," she gestured to his shoes, "is not only unprofessional but downright embarrassing. You are a reflection of this school, and frankly, this is not the image we want to present." A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but most were too stunned to speak. Ethan's face burned with humiliation. He wanted to shrink into the floor and disappear, but all he could do was stand there, frozen under her harsh gaze. Miss Thompson paused for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. "We will not tolerate such a lack of respect for the school's reputation. Make sure this doesn't happen again." With that, she turned away and continued the assembly as if nothing had happened, leaving Ethan standing there, his heart sinking deeper with every passing second. The whispers began almost immediately. He could hear the snickers, the sharp intakes of breath, and the murmurs of his classmates as they exchanged looks. Some of them had always been kind, but now they avoided his gaze, unsure of what to do. The others, the ones who never missed an opportunity to make someone feel small, wasted no time in mocking him. "Did you see his shoes?" one whispered louder than necessary. "I think they belong to his grandpa." "Yeah, I bet they're older than he is," another teased. Ethan's chest tightened and a lump formed in his throat. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. He felt small, invisible, and utterly ashamed. The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispered insults and sidelong glances. His classmates, some sympathetic but too scared to speak up, avoided him. Others, emboldened by the principal's public shaming, found new ways to make fun of him. By the end of the day, Ethan felt as though he had been crushed under the weight of their ridicule. He had gone from a boy who was invisible to one who was the constant subject of mockery, and it hurt more than anything. The following Monday, the atmosphere at the school was different. The students were abuzz with excitement about the surprise announcement that a special guest would be visiting that afternoon. Unbeknownst to Ethan, the school had been selected as the venue for a community event, and the guest was none other than Johnny Depp. The famous actor who had recently started working with a charity supporting underprivileged children was visiting to speak about his foundation's efforts and his passion for helping those in need. For Ethan, the day felt like any other, his mind still weighed down by the humiliation of Friday's assembly. He barely noticed the excitement around him, and he certainly didn't expect that today would be the day his life would change. The assembly hall was packed, with students eagerly sitting in neat rows, waiting to see the star. When Johnny Depp walked in, the room erupted in applause. Ethan, however, remained seated at the back, feeling as though the world was passing him by. He didn't have the energy to join in the excitement. His mind was still replaying the cruel words of the principal, and the sting of those words refused to fade. As the event went on, Johnny interacted with the students, answering questions and sharing stories from his charity work. His warmth and approachability were immediately apparent, and many students were thrilled to get a chance to speak with him. But then, Johnny's gaze landed on Ethan. The boy was sitting alone, his head down, looking as if he wanted to disappear. Johnny excused himself from the group of students and made his way over to him. "Hey there," Johnny said with a gentle smile, crouching down so he was eye level with Ethan. "I'm Johnny. What's your name?" Ethan, surprised by the attention, hesitated before replying. "Ethan." "Nice to meet you, Ethan. How's your day going?" Johnny asked, his voice kind and calm. Ethan looked at the floor, feeling the weight of his emotions. He wasn't sure how to explain the mess in his heart, but Johnny's calm, friendly presence made it easier to speak than it had been all day. "It's not going great," Ethan admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just feel different. People make fun of me because of my clothes, my shoes. It feels like I don't fit in anywhere." Johnny listened intently, never once interrupting, his expression full of understanding. It was the first time in days that someone had truly listened to him without judgment. Ethan's voice wavered as he continued. "It just makes me feel like I don't matter," Ethan said, his eyes brimming with emotion. Johnny's heart ached for the boy. He had seen so many children suffer in silence, just like Ethan, and it hurt him to know that someone so young was carrying such a heavy burden. Johnny's smile softened as he placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You matter, Ethan," Johnny said, his voice full of warmth. "What you wear doesn't define you. It's who you are inside that matters. And from what I can tell, you're a strong, smart kid. Never forget that." For the first time that day, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Johnny's kindness was a stark contrast to the cruelty he had faced, and in that moment, Ethan realized that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as invisible as he'd thought. The assembly hall was still buzzing with excitement when Johnny Depp took the stage, but there was a palpable shift in the air as he stepped up to the microphone. The audience, still eager to hear from the star, quieted down almost immediately, sensing something different was about to happen. Johnny's eyes scanned the room, finally resting on Ethan, who was still seated at the back, nervously shifting in his seat. His earlier conversation with Ethan weighed heavily on him, and Johnny knew he had to address what he had seen and what he had heard. "Before we continue," Johnny began, his voice calm but firm, "there's something I need to say." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room, making sure every student, every teacher was listening. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. What was Johnny going to say? The words from the principal's assembly still stung, and he felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Johnny took a deep breath and continued. "I've been hearing a lot about how we should dress, how we should look, and it's been bothering me." His eyes, now full of conviction, locked onto Principal Thompson. "I've seen a lot of kids, and I've seen a lot of people in my life, and let me tell you something, what a person wears, how they look, none of that defines their worth." There was a brief silence, and then Johnny's gaze softened, his voice growing more sincere. "True worth comes from who you are inside, the kindness you show, the strength you carry. Ethan, he said, turning to the boy, you are not your shoes, you are not your clothes, you are so much more than that. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Johnny's words sunk in. The students who had been too afraid to speak out before began to exchange looks, some of them nodding in agreement. Ethan felt his chest tighten with emotion, his eyes brimming with tears, as he finally heard words that made him feel seen. Johnny continued, his voice rising with passion. I can tell you that some of the most successful people in this world didn't have the newest clothes or the fanciest shoes. They had a fire inside them, a fire that didn't let anything, least of all material things, define who they were. As Johnny spoke, the principal, Miss Thompson, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had been watching the situation unfold, and now it seemed she was the one in the hot seat. She stood up, her voice shaky, but authoritative. I was only trying to teach discipline, she said, her tone defensive. Appearances matter. They reflect a person's character. I was doing what's best for the students. Johnny didn't flinch. He turned toward her, his expression serious but kind. Discipline is important, he acknowledged, but there are better ways to teach it than tearing a kid down. You don't build someone up by shaming them, by making them feel worthless. You build them up by showing them their worth, by encouraging them to be the best version of themselves, no matter what they wear. The tension in the room was thick, but Johnny's calm, steady words resonated with the students. Some of them who had quietly witnessed Ethan's humiliation days earlier now felt emboldened to speak up. A few of them stood from their seats and began clapping, softly at first, but then with more confidence. More students joined in, their applause growing louder. Even some of the teachers, who had stayed silent during the principal's earlier remarks, were now nodding in agreement, their faces softening as they began to understand the weight of what Johnny was saying. Miss Thompson, caught off guard by the wave of support for Ethan, stood silently for a moment, clearly rattled by the unexpected turn of events. Johnny, sensing the moment, turned back to the students. You all have incredible potential, he said, his voice warm again. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you're less than what you truly are. Don't let anyone define you by your appearance. It's your heart, your character, that will carry you through life. The room erupted in applause. For Ethan, it felt like the first time in days that he could breathe, the weight of shame lifting from his shoulders. And as Johnny Depp smiled at him, giving him a small nod of encouragement, Ethan realized that the world wasn't as cruel as it had seemed just hours before. After Johnny's speech, the entire atmosphere of the school had shifted. Ethan could feel a weight lifting off his chest, a pressure he didn't even realize he had been carrying. For the first time in a long while, he felt like someone truly saw him, not for his worn-out clothes or his quiet demeanor, but for who he was as a person. His classmates, who had once made cruel comments or ignored him entirely, now approached him with something entirely different: kindness. As the bell rang for the next class, Ethan stood up, unsure of what to expect. To his surprise, one of the students, Sarah, a girl who had never paid him any attention before, walked up to him. Hey Ethan, she said, offering him a hesitant smile. I'm sorry for laughing at you before. That was really wrong of me. I didn't understand how much it hurt. Ethan was taken aback, the sincerity in her words making his heart race. It's okay, he replied softly, his voice still shaky, but filled with a quiet gratitude. I just didn't know how to fit in. From that moment on, the floodgates opened. Other students, some who had mocked him in the past, approached him to apologize. A boy named Jason, who had once made the harshest remarks about Ethan's shoes, came up to him after class. I'm sorry, he said, his voice quiet but earnest. I didn't realize how bad I was making you feel. You're actually pretty cool, man. Ethan felt overwhelmed, but in the best possible way. He hadn't expected apologies, and certainly not from people who had been the ones to make him feel small. The warmth that spread through him was something he'd never known before. He didn't have to change who he was. He just needed to be seen. Later that afternoon, Johnny Depp met with Principal Thompson privately in her office. She was sitting at her desk, her hands folded, her expression a mix of regret and contemplation. Johnny, she began, her voice softer than usual. I've been thinking about what you said. I honestly never realized how much damage my words could cause. I thought I was just teaching discipline, but now, I see that I wasn't being fair." Johnny nodded, his voice calm but compassionate. "It's important to hold students to high standards, but it's just as important to understand where they're coming from. Every child has their own story, and sometimes, those stories come with burdens that we can't see." Miss Thompson's eyes softened as she absorbed his words. "I will try harder," she said quietly, "to be more empathetic, to understand the bigger picture." Johnny smiled, a warm, encouraging smile. That's all anyone can ask for. As the day went on, Miss Thompson found herself reflecting on Johnny's words. She had always believed in discipline and standards, but she now realized that empathy and understanding were just as important in shaping the student's future. It was a lesson she would carry with her, one that would change the way she approached her role as principal. The next day, as Ethan walked through the school's doors, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: confidence. The weight that had been pressing on him, that suffocating feeling of being different, had lifted. As he walked down the hallway, he noticed something unexpected. Students he had never spoken to, or who had ignored him before, were now smiling at him, greeting him with friendly words. "Hey Ethan, how's it going?" Jason, the boy who had apologized yesterday, waved from across the hall. Ethan blinked, unsure at first. "It's going good, I guess," he replied, a shy smile tugging at his lips. For the first time he wasn't dreading the day ahead. The snickers and whispers that had followed him everywhere had been replaced with a warmth he couldn't explain. As he made his way to class, Sarah and a few other students joined him, chatting casually. They talked about everything: movies, music, homework, nothing to do with his clothes or appearance. For the first time, Ethan felt like he belonged. The school, once divided by unspoken social lines and class differences, began to feel different. It wasn't just Ethan who noticed the change. The students who had previously been silent observers began to open up to one another, sharing stories, connecting over common interests, and offering support. It was as if the walls that had separated them had finally crumbled. Johnny Depp's visit had sparked something in the school, something that went far beyond his celebrity status. It became the talk of the town. The entire community was moved by his genuine kindness, and the way he had taken a stand for Ethan, a boy who had been made to feel invisible. The school's staff and students were inspired by his message of empathy and acceptance. In the days that followed, the school launched a charity drive to help underprivileged students, ensuring that no child had to feel the sting of judgment because of their appearance or background. Johnny Depp, true to his word, made a generous donation to the cause, making sure Ethan's family would have the resources they needed to support his education and well-being. The drive was a massive success, and students who had once turned a blind eye to the struggles of their peers were now eager to contribute. The sense of community that Johnny's visit had fostered was palpable, and it began to change the culture of the school for the better. Miss Thompson, having reflected deeply on the events, realized how much she had to learn. Moved by what she had witnessed, she took steps to make the school a more inclusive and compassionate place. She began implementing programs focused on promoting acceptance, kindness, and understanding, ensuring that students felt valued regardless of their background. A few days later, Miss Thompson personally reached out to Ethan's family. She had a conversation with his mother, apologizing for the way she had treated Ethan and expressing her regret for the hurt she had caused. "I was wrong," she admitted sincerely, "and I want to do everything I can to make it right, not just for Ethan but for all the students here." Ethan's mother, though initially surprised, accepted the apology. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaky but full of appreciation. "That means more than you'll ever know." As the weeks passed, Ethan felt like he had been given a second chance at school. He no longer felt like the outsider, the boy who didn't belong. He was now part of a community, one that had learned the true value of kindness and empathy, and it was a place where he could truly be himself. As the days went by, Ethan found himself standing taller, both literally and figuratively. The boy who had once walked into school each day with his head down, trying to shrink into the background, was now different. When he passed through the hallways, he didn't feel the need to avoid eye contact or hide behind the walls of his own insecurities. He was no longer ashamed of what he wore, and most importantly, he wasn't ashamed of who he was. His clothes, once a source of humiliation, were now just that, clothes. They didn't define him. The confidence that had eluded him for so long was finally within his reach, and it felt like freedom. One afternoon, Ethan stood in front of his classmates during a school assembly. The same classmates who had once ignored or ridiculed him were now listening to him as if he belonged. He had grown into someone who no longer needed validation from others to know his worth. He had learned through the kindness of someone like Johnny Depp that true strength comes from within. Ethan knew now that his value wasn't determined by his appearance or by what others thought of him. It was shaped by his heart, his kindness, and his ability to persevere. The school had changed too. No longer was it divided by class or status. The lessons learned from Johnny Depp's visit were woven into the very fabric of the school's culture. Students, teachers, and staff worked together to ensure that every child felt seen, respected, and supported, no matter their background. What had started as one act of kindness had blossomed into a movement of acceptance that would leave a lasting legacy. As the narrator reflects on Ethan's journey, they pause to consider the power of a single act of kindness. It's easy to forget, in the hustle and bustle of life, that the smallest gesture can create ripples that change lives forever. Sometimes, all it takes is someone reminding us that we are more than what we wear, more than the judgments others place on us. We are defined by our hearts, and that is the greatest gift of all. Thank you so much for watching this heartfelt story of Ethan and the powerful impact one act of kindness can have. It's a reminder that we all have the ability to make a difference in someone's life, no matter how small the gesture may seem. If this story touched you, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more inspiring content, and share it with your friends to spread the message of kindness and empathy. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, and let us know how this story resonated with you. Your support means the world, and together we can keep inspiring each other to make the world a better place, one act of kindness at a time. Thanks again for watching.